Until the lions have their own historians, the tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. When we think of castles, we often picture Europe's medieval knights. Surprisingly, these majestic structures originated in Africa, spreading from there across the world. Traditionally, forts and fortresses are seen as sturdy, high-walled stone structures with defensive features, often linked to European culture, famous for its fairy tales and princess stories. This video will explore how Africa is actually the birthplace of these impressive buildings. The misconception that so-called black Africans did not have the knowledge or skill to create stone structures before European influence is rooted in a complex mix of historical biases, lack of widespread knowledge, and, sometimes, outright racism. In this video, we will lay the evidence bare and deflate their ridiculous sense of racial superiority. They are superior to no one. The story starts in ancient Egypt, known for its grand forts. Historians believe the first fortifications were built about 6,000 years ago, during the pre-dynastic era. The city of Nekhen, once southern Egypt's capital, holds the oldest evidence of these structures. It's the birthplace of Pharaoh Narmer, who united Egypt over 5,300 years ago. After his conquest of northern Egypt, he established and fortified the northern capital, Memphis, to protect it against enemies. Throughout history, Egypt has seen many fortified structures, but the most notable is the Buhan fortress in Sudan. Believed to have started around 5,000 years ago, it reached its peak under Pharaoh Sen-Useret, Sesostris III, about 3,900 years ago. He expanded Egypt's territory across Western Asia and Europe and into Sudan. Despite Egyptians acknowledging their Sudanese roots, their relationship with the Sudanese was often tense. Sen-Useret built numerous fortresses, including the impressive Buhan, to secure the borders and protect Egypt from other African warrior groups. Buhan was in use for almost 1,300 years and showcased advanced features like moats, loopholes, ramparts, fortified gates, and lever bridges, which were later seen in European castles. Buhan, backed by the Nile River in Sudan, was an architectural marvel. However, its remains were submerged by the Nile's dam waters in 1964. The Buhan walls are preserved at the National Museum of Sudan in Khartoum, featuring depictions of notable figures like Pharaoh Hatshepsut. Sen-Useret, a significant figure in this history, also fortified the Temple of Imana at Karnak, Egypt's most crucial religious building. Temples were known as Hautentjer, Lord's Castle, in ancient African times, a term later adopted by the Romans and the Phoenicians. In Ethiopia, once part of Pharaonic Sudan, the Aksum kingdom, predating Christianity, had castles and obelisks. Interestingly, China began building fortifications around the same time as Ethiopia. In Europe, Roman Empire enclosures, dating back nearly 2,300 years, were typically wooden or earthen, with some stone structures. However, it wasn't until the 12th century, influenced by African designs, that Europe began embracing the tradition of fortified castles. After the decline of the Pharaonic civilization around 300 AD, fort construction continued in places like Zimbabwe. Here, the Mhanwa Monastery on a hill is one of Zimbabwe's oldest structures. However, the most remarkable is the fortified city of Jado in Niger, now abandoned and largely unknown, which UNESCO data suggests was built between 1,500 and 2,500 years ago. Jado, situated near an oasis at the edge of North Africa, was likely built by the Tubu and possibly the Kanuri people. This history intersects with the Arabs' entrance into Africa through Egypt around 640 AD. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the Arabs, later joined by the Berber blacks of the Maghreb, known as Moors or Saracens, moved into Spain, Portugal, Sicily, and southern France in 711. Europe, having regressed to a semi-barbaric state, was re-civilized by these groups. The Moors brought their extensive experience in fort building to Europe. The first such structure in Europe, built in Gibraltar in 711, was by Africans. The Moors established many such sophisticated defenses across their new territories. It took about 2 centuries for countries like France to start building similar structures in response to these invasions and Scandinavian attacks. By the 12th century, Europeans were rapidly constructing these fortifications, cementing their significance in medieval European history. Throughout history, African rulers, particularly in Morocco, continued to build impressive fortifications. Even in the 15th century, as Europeans began their forays into Africa, which eventually led to the horrors of the slave trade, these castles were still functional. The French historian Nicolas Sanson d'Abbeville, in the 17th century, described the Palace of Kami in Zimbabwe as large and magnificent, with towers and 4 main gates. The Dutch explorer Olfert Dapper added that it had 4 large entrances guarded by the emperor's sentinels, and was fortified with towers. Fast forward to the 18th century, and Ethiopians were still constructing fortified castles, like the one in Gondar in the north of the country. The Tata fort of Sikasso in Mali was the last operational fort in Africa, eventually destroyed by French colonists, marking the end of a 6,000-year-old African architectural tradition.